and unjustly detained Americans. I really appreciate the strong leadership. And according to Monday, Mr. Secretary, and you see the wonderful picture of you in today's Washington Post, you and your bride Jeanette meeting with the Pope. If you take a look up here, Marco, you see this great picture of you. And yeah, want to comment on that at all? What it was, done all these things, and you got to meet the Pope. A new Pope, an American.
Well, I told people yesterday I started the morning meeting with the Pope, and I ended the evening at an event, a Kennedy Center event at the White House with the U.S. President, and they were both Americans.
Amazing times. I want to talk about Iran, if we could. So in the first 100 days, the maximum pressure campaign against Iran came into full force once again. The administration sanctioned 72 entities, 14 individuals, 74 vessels, as well as 18 additional entities, including 2 Chinese-based oil terminals, 13 vessels. I think the maximum pressure campaign is working. We're already seeing a reduction in Iran's ability to fund destabilizing operations across the region. How does the administration plan to maintain this momentum and then continue with the talks that are going on?
Well, I think it's clear for the Iranians. I mean, we're going to continue with sanctions until there's a deal otherwise. And by the way, there's also another set of sanctions out there that involve things like the sponsorship of terrorism and things of that they're doing. But when it comes to the nuclear program, until there's a deal, there's going to be sanctions. That's just the way it works. And so that's the president has issued an executive order for maximum pressure, and that's being executed on every single day. None of these are being slowed down while we're engaged in these talks. Ultimately, if we are able to reach a deal, then obviously that could be a part of it, but we're not at that stage yet. So look, we hope that there can be something done. These will not be easy. And by the way, one additional note on it is there's a separate set of sanctions out there, which are the snapback provisions that the E3 in Europe have. That's on another clock, completely different from ours. And I want to be clear about that. What they decide to do with their sanctions. Now, maybe we'll do a deal with Iran and they'll be satisfied with it and not impose their sanctions. But I met with the E3 again, what day is it today? Tuesday? I met with them maybe 4 days ago in Turkey. And they are moving forward on their process, independent from ours, that could impose additional sanctions as early as July, August, September, October, November, September, October of this year.
I want to move to one of Iran's in the neighborhood neighbors with Syria. And President Trump met with the new Syrian president. He's urged the leader to deport foreign terrorists from Syria, help the U.S. counter ISIS. I want to just talk about ISIS, if I can, the concern for the resurgence of ISIS. It's been a significant concern. About 2,500 active ISIS fighters operating in Syria and in Iraq. Estimated 10,000 ISIS fighters in prisons in Syria. And what's your assessment of the threat posed in ISIS? And I know we have a presence. I was visiting our Wyoming troops who are in eastern Syria, and I want to know how that's helped to address the threats.
Yeah, so there's 2 major threats facing the transitional authority in Syria. The first is a resurgence of ISIS, many of them foreign fighters, most of them foreign fighters, and that's a very significant element because any space that's ungoverned, if there are parts of the country where the transitional authority does not control it, it creates an ungoverned space that ISIS can come in. So that's the first threat. The other is Iran. Iran has not given up its efforts to gin up former Assad officials and others to get behind certain armed groups on the ground and stir up trouble as well in the country. So these are both threats. They're different, but they're related, and they pose 2 of the most serious threats to the transitional authorities' efforts to create a nation state in in Syria that does not threaten Israel, does not threaten its neighbors, and is able to provide the life that the people of Syria want to rebuild for themselves, including many who are abroad, who have expressed a willingness or an interest in returning. And in fact, we've seen some of those people begin to return just because of the U.S. sanctions announcement. But we want that trend to continue because Syria will need them in order to rebuild their country and reclaim it.
Can I talk to you about Gaza? President Trump's laid out a plan for Gaza. You recently said we support a future for the people of Gaza that is free of Hamas and full of opportunity. How do you envision a transition to a non-Hamas security and governance in Gaza?
Well, that's a central question and not an easy one to solve, obviously. We've engaged with partners. There was an Egyptian-led effort for a while. There's a Saudi effort now. We've obviously engaged with our regional partners to come up with the constructs of what that looks like. Not to be frank, I mean, in the midst of the conflict ongoing, most of the attention has been paid to the humanitarian situation and the freeing of the hostages and multiple failed efforts at a ceasefire, which are ongoing and continue, and the hopes of ending this and the cessation of hostilities at some point. But thought has been given to it. But I think at the core of it is, I think we can find the funds to do it. I think you can find the partners to do it. I think the central question for the future of Gaza is going to be who governs it. Because as long as there's a group like Hamas there, it's going to be very difficult to envision long-term peace and prosperity. So whether it's Hamas or some successor organization that spins out of it, that has to be a factor that you eliminate. And one of the ways you prevent it is by having a governing authority on the ground in Gaza that can provide the security necessary to allow there to be the peace necessary so you can have the prosperity we hope for.
I want to talk, last question, in terms of American energy. You know, last year the Biden administration chose to pause approvals of pending LNG exports. We know that Europe needs those. It created a lot of uncertainty. President Trump has promised in his unleashing American energy, he's removed a lot of the obstacles. Our LNG exports have surged. I think it's going to help in Europe. European countries have increased their purchases of U.S. LNG. How has lifting this pause that Biden put on here restored confidence in America as a reliable partner to Europe?
Well, obviously, I was just commenting a moment ago, I believe on Saturday, the first LNG shipment reached Italy. And there are other countries that are building terminals to receive it as well. So the fact that the United States joins now in the world as a reliable long-term source of liquefied natural gas as an export, I think improves our ties and our partnerships around the world. And it's a need for us because we have the capacity to export it and to develop it. And it's a need for our allies who need to diversify and in some cases make less dependent their system of generating electricity. It's a fundamental problem for multiple countries, for example, in Europe. It's not just the energy they need now, it's the energy they're going to need in the years to come. If you do an audit of where they're going to wind up needing, they don't have any way to generate that now unless they rely on things like U.S. exports of LNG. And that alone even won't be enough. They're going to have to find some other resources as well.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Keep up the great work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Barrasso. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, you and I served together in Congress for 15 years. We didn't always agree, but I believe we shared some common values. A belief in defending democracy and human rights abroad and honoring the Constitution at home. That's why I voted to confirm you. I believed you would stand up for those principles. You haven't. You've done the opposite. And you used to speak with conviction about the importance of foreign aid as a tool to advance American values and interests. Then you stood by while Elon Musk took a chainsaw to USAID and other assistance programs. That has left a staggering toll. Broken trust with countries, openings for China and other adversaries, and countless preventable deaths of children and others. Take Sudan, for example. The freezing of U.S. humanitarian assistance forced the closure of nearly 80% of the emergency food kitchens there. 2 million famine-affected people were left without access to food. People died because of those actions. Mothers, fathers, and children. Tons of emergency food that could have saved their lives was left rotting in warehouses because you and Elon Musk refused to let USAID do its job. Sudan is a country where, by the administration's own determination, a genocide is unfolding in Darfur. But here's where it goes from cruel to despicable. While cutting off food aid to Sudanese families living through an actual genocide, you're fast-tracking white South Africans for refugee status under a manufactured claim that they are the victims of genocide. You tried to block the admission of individuals who had already been approved to come here as refugees while making bogus claims to justify granting such status to Afrikaners. You've made a mockery of our country's refugee process, turning it into a system of global apartheid where political ideology and race, more than truth or need, matter. And while you've turned away from a genocide in Sudan and invented one in South Africa, you teamed up with President Trump to throw the Ukrainian people under the bus and had been played like a fiddle by Vladimir Putin. Of course, Donald Trump not only said he would end the war in Ukraine on day one, he also said he would end the war in Gaza on day one. And yet last week, you were all running around to Gulf states, giving away very sensitive American AI and chips technology, but doing nothing to end the war in Gaza and get the remaining hostages returned. You know that for 78 days, the Netanyahu government did not allow a scrap of food to enter Gaza to reach over 2 million civilians. 57 children have died from malnutrition so far, and more than 14,000 children are in imminent danger of dying of starvation. As Cindy McCain said last week, and I quote, "Families in Gaza are starving while the food they need is sitting at the border." That is a gross violation of both U.S. and international law. What did you do? Nothing. Not once did you publicly call upon the Netanyahu government to end the blockade. Fortunately, other countries spoke out, and now we see a tiny trickle going in. Where have you focused your energy instead, Mr. Secretary? Well, your first trip as Secretary of State was to El Salvador, not to promote democracy, but to cozy up to President Bukele, who calls himself the world's coolest dictator. The result was a cash for collusion deal to deprive people living in America of their constitutional rights to due process. The Supreme Court, in a 9-0 decision, instructed you to facilitate the return to the United States of Abrego Garcia, who the administration admitted was wrongfully deported to El Salvador. Your response? You've openly flouted judicial orders. When asked whether you have been in touch with El Salvador to return Abrego Garcia, you boasted, quote, "I would never tell you that. And you know who else I would never tell? A judge." Clearly, you don't care about the Fifth Amendment right to due process, and you don't care about the First Amendment either, since you've been very busy snatching students off of college campuses for exercising their right to free speech. You dredged up a relic from the McCarthy era to claim that student protesters posed a threat to the foreign policy of the United States. Give me a break, Mr. Secretary. You know as well as I do, this isn't about national security. It's about punishing free speech. And you know that in America, the government doesn't get to use its power to punish speech it doesn't like. Yet in March, you boasted about revoking student visas, saying, and I'm quoting, "We do it every day. Every time I find one of these lunatics, I take away their visa," unquote. Let's look at one of those lunatics, Mr. Secretary, Ms. Ozturk. Her crime was co-authoring an op-ed in her college paper critical of Tufts University's response to the war in Gaza. Your own department found zero links to terrorism, no anti-Semitic statements, but you still yanked her visa and shipped her off to detention in Louisiana. And the list goes on and on. The federal judge in the case of Mohsen Madawi, who was the Columbia student who was ambushed by federal agents at his citizenship appointment, said, and I quote, this is the judge, "Legal residents not charged with crimes or misconduct are being arrested and threatened with deportation for stating their views on the political issues of the day. Our nation has seen times like this before, especially during the Red Scare and Palmer raids. Like the McCarthy-era witch hunts of the 1950s, your campaign of fear and repression is eating away at foundational values of our democracy. Back then, it took one voice, Attorney Joseph Welch, to cut through the hysteria with a simple question that marked the beginning of the end of that shameful era. He asked Senator McCarthy, "Have you no sense of decency?" And I would ask you the same, Secretary Rubio. You have shown through your words and your actions what the answer is. And I have to tell you directly and personally that I regret voting for you for Secretary of State. I yield back.
May I respond?
You may, sir.
Well, first of all, your regret for voting for me confirms I'm doing a good job, based on what I know.
Well, that's just
Your
a
record and
flippant
what you
statement,
stand
Mr.
for.
Secretary.
Can I respond, Mr. Chairman?
You may.
I didn't ask
Senator,
questions.
please let the secretary have
I'd be
the
happy
floor.
to, but then I can respond to his.
Your time's up, Senator, and woefully used, I might add.
Well-
your remarks do not represent the view of this committee.
Well, Mr. Chairman-
Secretary, please.
Well, I'd like to. I can't respond to everything he said because much of these are untrue, but I'll go through a few. First of all, I'm actually very proud of the work we've done with USAID. For example, I don't regret cutting $10 million for male circumcisions in Mozambique. I don't know how that makes us stronger and more prosperous as a nation.
I
I
raised
don't regret
Sudan, Mr.
psychosocial support services.
I
for
raised
USAID.
Sudan, Mr. Secretary.
Can I
not
respond, Mr.
Mozambique.
Chairman, or do I?
Senator, I'd ask you to suspend. You had 7 straight minutes of
I chose
railing
to
on-
use my time that way, Mr. Chairman. That's my right to
Please
use my
suspend,
time that way.
Secretary Rubio.
Well, I can go on. I mean, there's other things here. We spent $227,000 for Big Cat's YouTube channel from USAID. We spent $14 million for social cohesion in Mali, whatever the hell that means. So I can go on and on. I got the list here, and there's more. I didn't even bring the whole list. In the case of El Salvador, absolutely. Absolutely. We deported gang members, including the one that you had a margarita with. And that guy is a human trafficker, and that guy is a gangbanger, and the evidence is going to be clear in the days to come.
Mr.
You're
Chairman,
going to see who you went to
look,
defend.
Senator,
I'm sorry,
please,
Mr. Chairman.
Secretary
No.
Rubio has the floor.
Mr. Chairman, he can't make unsubstantiated
Senator,
comments like that.
Secretary Rubio has the floor. You had
Secretary
your time.
Rubio should take that testimony to the federal court in
Senator-
the United States because
Well,
he hasn't done it under oath.
Here's another point, okay? There is a division in our government between the federal branch and the judicial branch. No judge in the judicial branch cannot tell me or the president how to conduct foreign policy. No judge can tell me how I have to outreach to a foreign partner or what I need to say to them. And if I do reach that foreign partner and talk to them, I have under no obligation to share that with the judiciary branch. Just like a judge cannot order me to negotiate with a foreign minister of Russia, they cannot order me to negotiate with a foreign minister or the president of El Salvador. And if I did negotiate with them, which we have responded to them, and we've told them, we've had communications with the president of El Salvador, I am under no obligation, under our division of powers in this country, and to share with the judicial branch how I conducted diplomacy of the United States. It would actually be counterproductive. If I started sharing with courts, or frankly, with the media, my conversations with foreign leaders and all of their details, no foreign leader would talk to me again, and we would break trust with them. So I have complied with every court order. What I won't comply with is an order to disclose what I'm saying and what we're talking about with a foreign leader, because then they won't talk to me. Diplomacy doesn't work that way. About the student visas, let me say this. I don't deport anybody, and I don't snatch anybody. The State Department does not have officers in the street snatching everybody. What I do is revoke visas, and it's very simple. A visa is not a right. It is a privilege. People apply for student visas to come into the United States and study. And if you tell me that you're coming to the United States to lead campus crusades, to take over libraries and try to burn down buildings and acts of violence, we're not going to give you a visa.
Is that what Ms. Ostorp did?
We're not going to give you a visa.
Is that what she
And if
did?
you do
Come
that,
on, Mr. Secretary.
and every single
You're
one of
just
these
blowing
cases, the
smoke
factors
here
are
now.
different.
Senator-
The bottom line is, if you're
Senator,
coming here
we-
to stir up trouble on our campuses, we will deny you a visa. And if you
Does
have
the
a
First
visa
Amendment
and we find
apply
you,
to
we will
people
revoke
living
it.
in the United
And
States?
we're going to do more. There are more coming. We're going to continue to revoke the visas of people who are here as guests and are disrupting our higher education facilities. People are paying money. These kids pay money to go to school, and they have to walk through a
Writing an
bunch of
op-ed
lunatics
to the
who are
top
here on student
newspapers
visas.
disrupting the
Simple
foreign
as
policy
that.
of the United
I want to
States.
do more. I hope we can
That's
find more of these people.
pathetic, Mr.
In fact, the
Secretary.
other day, some guys led a riot. I forgot what university it was, and I asked, please, can you find the arrest records of all the people that were arrested at that riot at that campus? Because if any of them have a visa, we're going to revoke
I
it.
feel so much safer
All right,
if you lock
let's,
up people like Ms. Ostorp, Mr. Secretary.
We've had enough time on the subject. Thank you very much. And we're going to move to Senator Lee.
Mr. Secretary, it's very good to have you back here. I want to say it's good to see the fauna in its natural habitat, but it's more like its former habitat, because your current one is also where you naturally belong. And I, for one, and I know majority of us feel the same way, have every confidence in your ability to serve us and are very grateful for your service. One of the many things that I've always liked about you and I always agree with you on is your clear-eyed vision for the Western Hemisphere. You seem to share the understanding many of us have, which is that we've been blessed as a country throughout our 250-year existence by the fact that we're protected by a big ocean to our left, another big ocean to our right, and friendly neighbors to our north and south. Those natural barriers are good for us and gave rise to the Monroe Doctrine and things like that. And I appreciate the fact that we now have a Secretary of State who understands and appreciates the importance of the Western Hemisphere. So I want to ask you where the Western Hemisphere fits relative to other regions of the globe and with the current administration. Now, as I understand it, the America First Opportunity Fund is intended to support, quote, America's most enduring and critical partners. As you, as Secretary of State, work to realign State Department priorities and funding programs with our national interests, will the countries in our immediate periphery, those in our hemisphere, our neighbors, be counted among our most critical partners?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, by the way, the new Prime Minister of Canada was here a couple weeks ago. We had a very productive engagement with the President. Their new foreign minister is coming on board. Wasn't able to join us at the NATO gathering a few days ago, but look forward to interacting with her as well. We've obviously had some disagreements with Canada in regards to the nature of trade between our countries. But I think there's hope here that we can work something out on the trade front with them, although that's not something that I'm involved in negotiating. And then we have a lot of other mutual interests. As an example, national security on our shared obligations to NORAD and the defense of the North American continent. They've been a strong partner, and we look forward to building on that. And one of the most encouraging things is that Canada, that has historically not spent a lot of money, at one point less than 1% of their GDP on the military, it's now increasing, has made a pledge to get to 2%, and has signed on to the NATO pledge to get to 5% over the next decade. So I think that's going to strengthen our partnership as well in providing security to our hemisphere. Thank you.
I want to touch next on the contributions to international organizations account. This multi-purpose account has been used to facilitate U.S. payments to over 40 international organizations. I think the current tally might be at 44. Now, as someone who has been skeptical of international organizations and the way we fund them, the way they've been used, and the way they've used our money, I very much welcome the proposed reduction in funding of international organizations. But the budget request before us mentions only the UN in that context, not the dozens of other organizations that we're also funding. As you keep up your efforts to review our participation in and funding of international organizations, can you offer us some kind of a glimpse into the universe of organizations as to which we might be terminating our funding this year?
Well, I think there are some already that we have with UNRWA and some of the other programs that we are not happy with what they do. But the assessment is very simple, and that is our participation in this organization further our national interests or not? It doesn't mean we have to agree with everything the organization does, because sometimes there's benefit to being at the table. Sometimes there's benefit to being there and being able to influence the direction that it's going. In other cases, these are just forums that are used for anti-American positioning, but we're paying for it. So you start to ask yourself, well, why are people? And in other cases, you're legitimizing it. So you look at the Human Rights Council at the United Nations, which basically doesn't do anything to sanctions. In fact, it has become a place where some of the worst human rights violators on the planet go to hide. And yet we're funding that, and we're participating and giving it credibility. So I do think there are agencies like this. And here's one that I would say, because you asked about the Western Hemisphere, and I'm not saying it's one of the ones we're going to walk away from. I'm not claiming that right now. I am saying this. We have a catastrophe in our own hemisphere right now in Haiti that we are seeking to come up with an alternative strategy, because the one that's in place right now isn't working. And Haiti's heading in a very bad direction very quickly. And everyone's bending themselves twisting themselves into pretzels to try to figure out how can we get the United Nations or some other entity to fly a flag over the country that you could put a mission that deals with it. And I asked myself, the Organization of American States has not led a mission since 1965, I believe. Why do we have an Organization of American States if it is unable to collectively respond to what is a severe catastrophe in our own hemisphere? Again, I'm not threatening we're going to pull out of the OAS. And that's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is we need to challenge some of our existing memberships to step up. Because you would think that one of the reasons why the OAS exists is to deal with a crisis like the one we have in Haiti, which is not like a crisis anywhere else, because these are not warring ideological movements. This is a country being taken over by criminal gangs. Or in fact, much of it's already been taken over by criminal gangs, and you have to deal with that very differently. And I want to say one thing here publicly. We are grateful to the Kenyans and to the mission. We remain committed to it because they've done it at great sacrifice and risk, but that mission alone will not solve this problem. And so that is one example of something that I want to see us be able to lead on, and that is to get organizations like the OAS, which we contribute to quite a bit, step forward and provide a mission with member countries to deal with the issue of Haiti, which is about to take a very dramatic turn if not addressed very quickly.
It's a great point. I'm glad you raised OAS. I know that Lee Rizzuto has been named by President Trump to be our ambassador. That organization has a vision that aligns closely with that of the president and of you, our Secretary of State. Now, the Biden administration used the Development Finance Corporation as yet another vehicle for pursuing international climate alarmism with U.S. funding. Under the Biden administration, the DFC committed $20 million for sustainable tilapia production in Kenya, $50 million to purchase new vehicles for a car rental business in Ukraine, and $350 million for wind power in Turkey. These are just a few examples. As the Trump example seeks to lean on the DFC as an alternative for foreign aid, what sorts of projects and in which regions would you advise the U.S. To fund through the DFC?
Well, I think that's first of all, the DFC obviously is independent from the Department of State, so they have an own board and an own governing structure. Although I'm a member of it, I don't control it. But I think the broader question that you're asking is exactly the point of this reorganization, and that is it will now be incumbent upon our regional bureaus and our embassies under those bureaus to identify those opportunities for us. And then to elevate that at the leadership level and say, here's what we need to be funding in this country on the basis of our interaction. For example, in the Caribbean basin, when you talk to leaders there, they will tell you their number one need is to build up the capacity of their local law enforcement so they can take on these gangs. If they can get control of the gangs and the security situation, then they can expand to economic development and things of that nature. But it's difficult to do as long as it's insecure on the ground. These are the kinds of things that we want to be able to pursue, which is why we want to empower the regional bureaus and our embassies to have a role to play in determining what we fund and what we put our money towards.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I see my time's expired. Thank you, Secretary Rubio.
Thank you, Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to get right into it. Secretary Rubio, I'm going to embrace my Jewish mother instincts for a moment. So as a mother, a senator, and a fellow human being, I can tell you that I'm not even mad anymore about your complicity in this administration's destruction of U.S. global leadership. I'm simply disappointed. And I wonder if you're proud of yourself in this moment when you go home to your family, because I've always found you, Senator Rubio, to be a bipartisan, pragmatic partner, a true believer that the U.S. is stronger when we lead with diplomacy and development. You have a strong record on this, but I don't recognize Secretary Rubio. A stalwart support of Israel, you've watched this administration abandon Saudi normalization with Israel in order to pursue business deals. You were once a fierce critic of Vladimir Putin, but you sat idly by as the president berated the elected leader of Ukraine for not capitulating to Russia. And worst of all, you've kneecapped foreign assistance, including programs that you previously championed and made America less safe, less strong, less prosperous. In doing so, I know you know this in your heart. And I can't make this point any better than you did yourself in 2019 when you said, anybody who tells you that we can slash foreign aid and that will bring us to balance is lying to you. So with that, I'm just going to move on to my questions. Thank you. And I'm going to talk about international women's issues because during your time as senator, you were a champion of international women's issues. You helped introduce bills that would have codified the Department's Office of Global Women's Issues and Women's Global Development Prosperity Initiative. You supported several bills, including Senator Shaheen's Bipartisan Women, Peace, and Security Act. During your confirmation hearing, you committed to me that you would support women's economic empowerment abroad. And at this year's International Women of Courage Award, you waxed poetically about the administration's support for women abroad. So help me understand how to square your past with your present. You're proposing the full elimination of the Office of Global Women's Issues. You've terminated hundreds of programs that help women and girls. You provided no guidance to the department on whether they should continue to implement the Women, Peace, and Security Act, and I'm still waiting to see your support for women's economic empowerment overseas. How can you dismiss the concerns of women around the world? Do you believe that the data shows that women's economic participation includes greater economic development worldwide and that women's participation in peace negotiations guarantees longer outcomes? And I have a few questions, so I would respectfully ask for a yes or no. Don't you think that women's participation is important and allows for better outcomes?
This is not a game show. I'm not gonna ask that with a yes or no. That's an important question. And I can answer it. We're not abandoning women's issues.
So do you believe the Office of Global Women's Issues should be eliminated?
One thing is to eliminate an office. Another thing is to eliminate the function. The function will still exist. It'll be driven at the regional bureaus. So every one of our regions will have someone who's looking at and driving that issue, and right down to the embassy. It remains a priority. The same with the law that you outlined. that I supported, this is going to be executed on, but it's going to be executed at the regional level and at the embassy level. And the reason why is because the challenges facing women in Africa are different than the challenges facing women in Central America,
And
which
I
are
have your
different than.
commitment that you're going to support women around the world, because without the women being able to be successful in their countries, I believe we can't have peace, stability, and our countries move forward.
Sure, and it remains part of our agenda. It's just going to be, the service is still going to be delivered, but it's going to be delivered at the regional and embassy
And when
level,
will we
not
see-
through a standalone office in Washington, D.C.
When will we see the reports on this and how this will be delivered?
Well, this is what we're engaged in with this committee now, which is our reorganization process. We've made an initial presentation to the committees. It's not final. We've received input through the comment period, including from our own building, but also from members of Congress on both sides, and meaning the House and Senate.
but what-
Now we'll come back to you based on all of that input on what we propose to
Do
be
you
the
have a
final
timeline when
reorganization.
you'll come back? Because I don't want to see women left behind around the world, and I think you'd agree with me. But I'm going to turn on to Israel. If you can give us a timeline of when you're proposing to do this, that would be helpful, and we maybe come back and revisit it, Mr. Chairman. Do you have a timeline of when?
Sure, we're engaged now. I think we'll owe you a congressional notification here within the next few weeks, which is but all of that is being built on the comment period, in which we've taken input from staff and members of this committee, as well as in the House.
Thank you. Can I move on to Israel for a second? So the Office of Security Coordinator in Israel, the OSC, was established by President Bush in 2005. The OSC is widely respected, including by the IDF Central Command, for facilitating security coordination between the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli security forces, which has been crucial in preventing terrorist attacks against Israelis. However, it's reported that you plan, again, to eliminate OSC, which I believe, and many others, could lead to further destabilization in the West Bank and threaten Israel's security. So, Mr. Secretary, should the U.S. continue playing a role in facilitating successful security coordination between IDF and Palestinian security forces to safeguard Israeli lives? And if so, do you believe the State Department should continue to maintain the OSC and support it financially?
Yeah, there's news reports every day about things that aren't true. So the only thing that's been discussed about OSC is whether it should be brought under the authority of the ambassador and the embassy.
You're not proposing eliminating. Thank you. We'll move further on this discussion. With my minute left, I'm going to talk about vaccines abroad, because Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, we are so proud, has prevented nearly 19 million children's deaths since it was created by providing vaccines to 50 countries. Diseases, they don't know borders. So a small investment from the U.S. can save American lives by stopping outbreaks really before they reach our shores. You were previously a champion of global vaccines, twice leading resolutions in support of continued U.S. investments in these programs. So, Mr. Secretary, again, do you consider vaccines, including for malaria, Ebola, to be life-saving? Given Gavi's proven track record of saving lives, preventing global disease outbreaks that could reach our borders, will you commit to prioritizing continued U.S. support for Gavi?
But we haven't canceled U.S. support for malaria or any of these other communicable diseases and or vaccines. What we have, there are some individual programs that may have been canceled because they weren't being delivered in the appropriate way. All of these functions will continue. The difference now is the function will be happening under the Department of State, as opposed to a set-alone entity, which you had very little oversight over, by the way, in this committee, even though we tried in the years that I was on it with USAID. And I don't want to, I may respond to one point you made just because I'm curious. We have not abandoned Saudi normalization with Israel, as you pointed. The Saudis are the ones that have expressed their inability to move forward on it so long as the conflict is happening in Gaza. But we would love to see normalization.
You know, when it comes to the Saudis and normalization, and we can have this I'd be so happy to have you in my office or come to your office and talk about this. It was quite apparent on the last trip that the president was more interested in making business deals and trying to move forward peace in the region. It's not just about the business deal. There's a lot going on, and there is pressure to bear. But we did receive a list, I just want to say for the record, that showed Gavi was terminated. And so if you could send something to show that it's turned back on, we'd be glad to see that. I know I'm over my time.
Senator Scott.
All right. Secretary Rubio, first off, I'm proud to have voted for you. I wish you were in the Senate, but I'm proud that you're Secretary of State, and I can tell you, Floridians are very proud of you. As you know, Miami-Dade, finally for the first time in history, is now more Republican than Democrat. I'm sure they looked at you and saw all the success you've had, so one of the reasons it happened. Can you talk about what you're trying to accomplish with your reorganization and how that's going to improve national security?
Well, ultimately, the goal of reorganization is to make the put State Department at the center of our foreign policy, which people will look at and say, well, how, isn't that what it's always been? But it actually had lost that role. Now, one of the reasons why it had lost this role is inability to deliver quickly. In essence, the inability to deliver quickly on whatever policymakers determined they wanted them to do, and there was structural reasons for that and the like. The other thing is that we are now in an era that requires, I think every era has required this, but now more than ever, a foreign policy that's cohesive, where all the elements of national power, including soft power, which has been talked about here today with foreign aid, but also the hard work of diplomacy, of understanding that sometimes when you're dealing with another nation state, they're not going to behave the way you would want your country to behave, but it's in our national interest to have a relationship with them and be able to influence discrete decisions that they make on one topic or another. And all of this has to be coordinated. And that wasn't happening. We had functional bureaus that were basically in charge of some human rights issue. And then we had an embassy. And oftentimes when you would travel abroad, you would find that our embassy and or our regional bureau and our functional bureau were at odds with one another. Because the functional bureau was pushing one agenda, the embassy was pushing another. And this was also true with USAID. By the way, this idea that USAID got along well with the State Department is false. And embassy after embassy, during my time in oversight, you would hear complaints about how USAID was funding programs that the State Department had no insight into and in many ways contradicted what the State Department was driving at the embassy level. So what we're asking for now through this reorganization is to bring it all under one roof so that we can conduct foreign policy at the regional and local level in a way that's cohesive and concise and can deliver results. But it's also where you're going to get the best ideas from. I read cables from our missions around the world every single day. Some of the most important information that I get as Secretary of State is not from intelligence reports, it's not from news articles, it's not from briefings from somebody. It is from a cable that comes directly from that embassy that is identifying a problem and or an opportunity that I may not hear about for months if it ever makes its way through the system. So we want to empower that because that's our front lines. These are the people that are on the ground every single day dealing with the government, dealing with society, and they're identifying opportunities and problems months, if not years, in advance of what Maine State or others are identifying. So the goal of reorganization is to shorten that time frame because we can't afford to move slow. The world moves very, very quickly. This decision we made on Syria, had we run that through a traditional process, would have taken months and months and months of interagency this and people talking that and all the different boxes that have to be checked in some memo that gets to me. Our ability to move quickly on a discrete, on a unique opportunity in a time-effective manner, I think is going to bear dividends for the national security of our country if it works out. And we want to be able to see more of that. And that's really the goal of reorganization. People think this is a cost-cutting exercise. There may be savings. There need to be savings. We just had our credit rating downgraded. You talk about a foreign policy problem? That's the first thing our foreign interlocutors wanted to mention to me on Sunday in Rome, is that our credit rating was just downgraded. We have a debt problem, but that's obviously not a State Department issue, but that's our problem. But that's a problem. But this is not just about cost savings. This is about providing a more efficient, faster moving, more effective State Department and as a tool of diplomacy. The State Department should be at the center of American foreign policy making. And that's our goal, to create one, to reorganize one that can deliver on that.
I want to thank you and President Trump for your focus on Latin America. Can you tell me what do you think the proper role of the Organization of American States is? What should they be doing?
Well, you would think that they would be able to be a forum to deal with challenges in the region. None more pressing right now than what's happening in Haiti. I mean, Haiti's basically been taken over by a coalition of gangs who they're not interested in governing the country. They're not interested in running the country. They just think if there's no government, we're in charge of this territory, and from here we can do all the drug running and organ smuggling and human smuggling, all the stuff we want. And that's what they're trying to do, and that's what they're doing. That's a very unique challenge. Our traditional peacekeeping missions are designed to keep ideological groups from fighting each other, or tribal groups from fighting each other, or in many cases nation states from fighting each other. But that traditional approach is not going to solve this very unique challenge. It is a country basically taken over by 25 to 30,000 individuals who are members of criminal gangs who simply want to control territory so they can hijack trucks, steal and or charge exorbitant fees for fuel to move across the country, kidnap people and traffic in humans, traffic in drugs across the border into the Dominican Republic and through sea-bound lanes. And there's things that we need to do. For example, we need to figure, and we've been working with the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, the ATF, and others on how can we cut the flow of guns that are leaving the Miami River on containers and reaching not just Haiti, but Jamaica and Trinidad and other places. So there's more we can do on that front. But from the OAS's perspective, if ever there was a regional crisis that you would think an organization like this could step forward and provide a force or a group of countries that working together could help solve it, would be the OAS. And we're prepared to play a leading role in that. But we do need buy-in from other partners in the region who are as affected, if not more so, by what's happening there. So that's one example of what the OAS should help on. And obviously the other is on the defense of democracy, which is the OAS is a collection of democratic institutions. In places like Nicaragua, there is no. In Venezuela, in Cuba, there is no democracy.
Can you talk about how you're working to reform the foreign service officer recruitment?
In terms of reforms? Well,
Yeah.
well, two things we're doing. On the promotion board, we're not getting rid of the promotion board. I read some the other day. We have simply suspended it for a month while we reevaluate how we promote people. We want to promote people on the basis of how good they are. I know this is a shocking view, but we want to promote people on the basis of how good they are. And frankly, on occasion, you will find that a more junior officer, meaning they've only been there 10 years instead of 20, is really good and deserves a promotion. And if you don't promote them, they're going to leave the Foreign Service. The same is true for how we recruit people. We want to widen the base of people. And in fact, one of the things we thought about is, are there people in the middle of a career doing something else in the private sector that are interested in entering diplomacy? There was a program to do that back in the 1980s, and it was very successful. Maybe these are people that will give us 15 or 20 years in that regard. So we are looking to expand our talent pool, but ultimately, we are also seeking to have a system internally where we are rewarding merit and performance, and not simply seniority or where you are in the pecking order based on how long you've been there. And that doesn't mean that if you've been there a long time, you're not good. But it means there are some people that haven't been there as long that are just as good or not better. And we want to make sure they're promoted, because if not, we're going to lose them. We're going to lose them to the private sector.
Thank you. You're doing a great job.
Senator Booker.
Thank you very much, Marco. First of all, I just want to say I agree with what you said about it being a foreign policy crisis, the great debt and the downgrading that we just saw. To be pushing a bill right now that would add $2.7 trillion to our national debt is just outrageous. And I've been grateful for the small group of Republicans here in the Senate and a number in the House who have just called this out as plain as it is. To do this now will shake America's economy, give tax breaks to the wealthiest amongst us who are doing quite well, and not help with the current economic crisis we're facing. But that's frankly just something I didn't want to talk about right now. But I really want to just continue our conversation about Sudan. And I know you know, as was said passionately by one of my colleagues, the gravity of the crisis that's over there. Full stop. It's the greatest humanitarian crisis on the planet Earth. There's ethnic cleansing going on, an active genocide as described by our own government and others. That people are fleeing right now with the recent attacks on Zamzam and more, but I know you're very aware of this. What I want to ask you about specifically is that not only did you acknowledge the genocide and say, I quote, being backed by countries that we consider allies elsewhere in the world. This is being fueled, you were saying. We must draw a clear line on that. He specifically mentioned the UAE, and you said, and I quote, take UAE, for example. They are an important partner in the Middle East, but we must be clear they are currently supporting an entity that is carrying out genocide. I'm just wondering, have you been able to draw that clear line in your conversations with the UAE, specifically addressing the issue of the supplying of arms?
Well, again, and I wasn't satisfied when people would answer this way when I was sitting on that side, but now on this side with diplomacy, you always want to be careful what you say publicly, because then people don't want to talk to you if they think it's going to happen in the future. Let me say this we have expressed, not just to the UAE, but to other countries, that they are turning it into a proxy war, that it's destabilizing the region, that in fact it's creating an environment, not just in Sudan, but it's threatening to South Sudan already faces pretty substantial challenges, but some of that threatens to spill over and make it even worse.
If I can interrupt, Marco, because I think your answer's justifiable. The UAE is a vital ally to the United States and a lot of other critical areas of the world.
But it doesn't serve their interest. But my point is, it doesn't serve the interest of some of these countries involved to continue to pursue this route, because instability there is going to create a breeding nest for.
And I guess what my hope is,
radicalism.
and I know you and I can have further conversations privately, is that we are pressing hard on those people that are fueling the conflict. But I want to ask the next part of this question is the U.S. leadership is critical to end this. This is actually something that we can achieve, not only alleviation of the suffering, but an end of this. If a humanitarian corridor is created and respected, this is something we can help to do. Finding diplomatic resolution to the conflict is something we can do. Now, there's a bipartisan a commitment in this committee, mandate to appoint a special envoy for Sudan. We know that that kind of leadership can help address this the worst crisis on the globe. Time is not in our favor. Are you going to get a special envoy appointed, as colleagues on both sides of this aisle want to happen?
We do. We want to. We'd love to have somebody in charge of that. We know we have a similar arrangement with DRC, Rwanda, and have seen it play dividends.
Mr. Secretary, all I'm looking for is a sense of urgency and an answer yes.
Yes, the answer is, but we have to find the right person, and that's the challenge.
Next, 30 million people in Sudan require humanitarian assistance. In February, it was reported that, and you heard this passionately, that the freeze in humanitarian assistance is causing untold suffering. I was there myself in Chad last year and saw the role that we were playing. And frankly, I saw how great American companies like Plumpy Nut here were doing good, a double bottom line. They were helping to alleviate the crisis over there, as well as helping American businesses here. I just am hoping that you can say that you will commit to resume and even surge United States humanitarian assistance, particularly food aid, as soon as humanly as possible.
Well, all of that has been approved. All of the life-saving food and medicine programs have been turned on. To the extent that there's been impediments, has been one or two things. Either A, on the payment system front, where we faced a couple of weeks where we couldn't get money moving through Treasury because of a variety of different reasons, including changes to the technology, but that's largely been resolved. And the other is the ability to distribute it once the aid arrives at site.
Marco, Mr. Secretary, you and I have been friends for a very long time. A sense of urgency is what I'm asking for right now. That every day that we delay or that we don't plow through the line of defense here, that's stopping this from happening. People are dying. I know you, and I know we can do better. And as you and I both were taught back in the days we were playing football, better is possible, good is not enough. I want to move to my next question for you. Is the refugee camps, the U.S. main corridor to life-saving assistance, which I said to you, I visited. I'm just hoping that we can make sure that we are doing more. And I'll be specific in an example of another area. Despite the escalating humanitarian crisis, the United Nations Humanitarian Air Service is vital. The termination of those flights, makes it likely that all of Chad's aid into Chad will stop and end, and they will have no resources by the end of July. It can take a week to reach Chad's border from the capital via motorcade. And so this is a vital lifeline that we were supporting. During the rainy season, you can't make that trip by road at all. And I know, again, that you know this. Why was the award terminated for these flights? It is, to me, this is just very plain. This is the lifeline. And it was denied a waiver, which we reached out for. It's just, again, a very plain way that we could save lives. And I'm not sure if it's just because it had the UN in the title, but can we get a resumption of these flights that will literally save lives by getting resources?
I think the answer to your question is that while you were talking about a mode of transport versus the actual aid, and I understand how important that is, then the question is what percentage of responsibility the United States should bear in comparison to other countries that have capability and are actually closer to the problem. So there's a broader issue here, and that is there does come a point at which we have to understand that the United States, there's great causes all over the world. And I'm not speaking specifically about the flight because I owe you a specific answer on that question. I don't recall that waiver. I don't recall the denial.
Marco, that's all. Excuse me, Mr. Secretary, that's all I'm looking for.
But all I want you to understand is that not every program we've ever funded is going to be funded in the future because we have to balance these things.
Mr. Secretary, I am aware of that. I just want an answer. I mean, this is like Schindler's List. Doing a little more saves lives. And I know we are more capable than we are right now. And I'm asking for that answer.
I'll get you the answer on the flights.
And the flights and some of the other things I mentioned, and I'm happy to work with you on the special envoy. There are people on both sides that are willing to do that. And I'll say in conclusion, because I'm over, but other people did. I do not want to lecture you, especially because I know I've had enough conversations that I know your moral core. But what my colleague brought up very passionately about the Afrikaners, I want you to know, as a person that talks to countries and leaders like you do all over Africa, they are already seeing us not prioritizing ambassadors. They see embassies being closed. But the torrent I got on the Afrikaners reminded me of the torrent I got from African leaders when the president called those countries like those in Africa shithole countries. The anguish and the anger and the disappointment and the feeling of double standards. So just from a diplomatic range, where we're in a competition in many ways on that continent that you and I talked in your confirmation hearings about the profound moral urgencies, economic opportunity, security mandates, the cooperations with these countries. We have got to do a better job, in my opinion, and I've worked with you on these issues when you were a senator, diplomatically in prioritizing these issues. And I will partner with you in any way possible to make sure that we are addressing what I believe is a diplomatic shortfall right now in advancing American interests on the continent.
If I might just real quick, we haven't closed any embassies, so I think people are responding to like articles talking about the potential for embassy closures and things of that nature, but we haven't closed any embassies. And we have been engaged. Listen, Africa, to me, is one of the priorities that I've set for us in terms of our global view because of the opportunities, because of the youth of the continent, because of explosive growth that we're going to foresee. And as an example of it, one of the things we prioritized, which a lot of people thought was intractable, was trying to reach a peace agreement between the DRC and Rwanda. Now, it's not done, but we brought them both here to Washington, D.C. about a month ago. They signed a memorandum of understanding. The negotiations are moving forward. They're actually moving forward very well. Our hope is to arrive at a peace deal there that ultimately ends what was turning out to be a very brutal and difficult conflict. So I take your point on Sudan and the need for an envoy. We would love to find the right person to handle that portfolio because it has to be the right person. And we have played a supportive role. For example, the UK, about a month and a half ago, led a Sudan summit in London for a day, where a lot of other countries, well, we sent someone, we've offered to be helpful and work with them on it. But a lot of other countries either didn't make commitments or didn't live up to the commitments. The summit sort of was a minor disappointment because while everyone talks a big game around the world about it, they're not stepping up. But I take your point. I'll get you your answer on the flights because I'm not aware of that specific waiver. And on the envoy, we'd love to work with you to find the right person.
And the ambassadors and other things, I'll reach out to your office on.
Okay.
Senator Cornyn.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'm proud of my vote for you to confirm you as Secretary of State. We all know you well, having worked with you for many years. We know of your the qualities that you bring to this job, and I think you're exactly the right person for this job in a very dangerous and turbulent world. When I look at what you and the administration has done just it's May the 20th, January the 20th, President Trump was sworn into office, but just a few of the things that have happened during that time, obviously the critical minerals deal in Ukraine, the Pakistani-Indian conflict, which could have resulted in a nuclear conflict between two nuclear-armed countries, things back closer to where I live, the Mexican water deal that was negotiated with Mexico. I'm frankly amazed at your stamina and what you and the administration have been able to do in a short period of time. And listening to some of the criticism that I've heard this morning, it reminded me of a quote from NFL quarterback Aaron Rodgers talking about dealing with criticism, things he wished he had known when he was younger. And he said, never listen to criticism from somebody that you never would have taken advice from in the first place. But let me ask you specifically about two issues. One has to do with Ukraine and peace negotiations. I applaud you and the administration, and particularly President Trump, for initiating these negotiations between Ukraine and Russia and try to bring a peace, or at least a ceasefire, between these warring countries. This is enormously dangerous, as you know
better than most because it could easily spill over into the rest of Europe, result in NATO becoming involved and the like. But I wonder what you believe Mr. Putin's motivations are. Do you think that he is engaging in these negotiations in good faith, that he intends to give something in order to get something, or not?
Well, I think that's on the question of Putin. I think that's still an open question. I think he approaches it, we have to assume, from a cold, calculated cost-benefit, nation-state evaluation of what's in the best interest of his view of Russia. What I'm pretty certain of is this is not the war he thought he was getting. When he first invaded Ukraine, I think he anticipated that the government would collapse and that he would be greeted as a liberator, and it has not turned out that way. And in fact, Russia today controls less territory than they did after the first 2 months of the war. So they've suffered significant losses. They've suffered the losses of at least, by some estimates, 250,000 men in uniform, and the Ukrainians have suffered less, but nonetheless suffered as well. It is a battlefield today in which the front lines move 10 kilometers at a time in one direction or another. Even if they're advancing at a tremendously high cost. But the challenge Russia faces now is their entire economy is built around the war effort. Their entire economy is built around munitions production and frankly around the fact that you've deployed about 1 million to 1.5 million people to the front lines, and they're making a lot more money fighting a war than they would in the private sector. So I think that that's potentially a challenge here in terms of bringing this war to an end. What we've tried to do is find any way forward to end this conflict. We think it is costly, it is deadly, it is disruptive, and we want to see it end. We want to see it end because of the destruction to Ukraine. We want to see it end because of the strains it's placing on the budgets of countries, neighboring countries, and the fears that it's stirring up in their regard. We want to see the conflict end in a way that's enduring. Meaning not a peace that lasts 3 months and then restarts again, but something that's enduring, that both sides could live with for a long period of time without it restarting again. And that's hard. There's a reason why. This an effort that I wish would have started 2 years ago, but it's starting now. We've done the best we can because we are able to talk to both sides. Obviously, only one side is getting American aid, and only one side is receiving American sanctions. But nonetheless, we think it's important to preserve our ability to talk to both sides. The president is fully aware and has intimated on a number of occasions that he has options available to him in the sanctions field that he could pursue if, in fact, he determines that Putin is not interested in negotiating. But by the same token, I think the president is very committed to ending the dying, ending the bloodshed, ending the destruction, and he wants to preserve, as long as he possibly can, the opportunity to influence both sides towards peace. The minute you do certain things, your influence over one of the two sides to at least lead to peace really diminishes. And then we're back to where we were in January when he went into the White House, which is with no one had a clear path forward. I mean, there had been no... The first time Russians and Ukrainians have actually met directly and spoken was 3 days ago in Turkey. They had not spoken since the Istanbul process in 2022 had failed. So there are 1,000 prisoners that are going to be released from both sides from a humanitarian standpoint. That's good. What we haven't seen yet is moves towards peace. It's our understanding that the Russians are going to write up terms for what they would require in order to reach a ceasefire that then would allow broader negotiations. We await those terms, and then we'll have a much better understanding about Mr. Putin's calculation once we see what those terms look like.
So to quote you, the jury's still out.
These are complex conflicts, obviously, that are difficult to bring to bear, and there are a lot of other things playing at stake. But I do think that whatever offer Russia puts on the table, if in fact they do, as they said they were going to do, they put an offer on the table and say, if this happens, we agree to a ceasefire and further negotiations. I think that offer will tell us a lot about their intent here in the short term.
Well, I applaud your and President Trump's efforts to try to bring a ceasefire and hopefully a peaceful outcome to this terrible bloodshed, which has devastated both sides, the Ukrainians and the Russian people. Since you wear multiple hats, including as the archivist and Secretary of State, one of those that you wear is the National Security Advisor, and I want to talk a little bit about the Indo-Pacific and the threat that we face from a potential conflict there. I am delighted to hear President Trump repeatedly say he believes in peace through strength. And I think is exactly right. I think that's exactly the right approach. But I worry that the United States and our allies are not ready for what could be a conflict initiated by President Xi as early as 2027, when he's instructed the People's Liberation Army to be ready to take Taiwan. General Douglas MacArthur said these words, which sort of haunt me in this connection. He said, "The history of failure in war is almost always to be summed up in two words: too late. Too late in comprehending the deadly purpose of a potential enemy, too late in realizing the mortal danger, too late in preparedness, too late in uniting all possible forces for resistance." I don't believe we are ready at this point, but can you share with us your view and the administration's view of what we need to do in order to establish that deterrence that comes from peace through strength in the Indo-Pacific?
Yeah, in the most simplistic terms, we have to make the benefit of a Taiwan event for China, we have to make the benefit of it less than the costs. In essence, it has to cost more than what it's worth in order to do something like that. And deterrence is the key to that regard. And I think deterrence obviously begins with Taiwan's own self-defense capabilities. And the harder they are to take militarily, the more time I think they buy for themselves in that regard. I think it continues by having a credible regional deterrent, not just the United States, but Japan and other allied countries around the world. And an increased interest in the Indo-Pacific, by the way, from our European allies. I was at the NATO foreign ministers gathering over the last week in Turkey, and multiple member states raised their concerns about the Indo-Pacific and what it would mean for the European continent if there were a conflict there. So I think that also underpins why it's important. We have to understand that anytime there's a conflict in the Middle East or a conflict in Europe or what have you, that we have to dedicate resources and time to that. That's time and resources that we're not dedicating to the Indo-Pacific. We would like to be able to do all things everywhere, but the fact of the matter is there are finite resources and there's only 24 hours in every day. And so it would be of great benefit if we were able to conclude the war in Ukraine and with Russia and Ukraine, if we were able to establish some stability and peace in the Middle East, if we were able to deal with these issues, it would allow us to focus more time, energy, and frankly, resources on some of the challenges we face in the long term with regard to the Indo-Pacific and other parts of the world, but particularly the Indo-Pacific.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome back. When you were last testifying before this committee, you and I talked about water in South Texas, and we talked about the 1944 Water Treaty. As you know well, South Texas has, for the last 4 years, faced a severe drought, and that drought has been substantially exacerbated by the conduct of the government of Mexico, and in particular, its repeated and flagrant violations of the 1944 Water Treaty. Under that treaty, Mexico is obligated to provide 350,000 acre-feet of water each year to South Texas. Mexico was breaking that treaty, and there were 1.3 million acre-feet of water in arrears. As a consequence, South Texas is facing a massive drought. South Texas farmers are putting out of production up to half their acreage. They're laying off workers. Last year, the only sugar mill in the state of Texas closed because sugar farmers could not get the water to grow their crop. And you committed at that hearing to work with me and assist in pressuring Mexico to comply with that treaty. In the months since then, you have followed through on that commitment. You have leaned in vigorously with the government of Mexico. Your deputy, Chris Landau, has done the same thing. Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins has done the same thing. And then critically, President Trump put out a public statement on Truth Social, making clear to Mexico that there would be serious consequences, sanctions and tariffs if they did not comply with the water treaty. I will say, as a result of the president's leadership and your hard work, we've had a major victory for South Texas, and Mexico has committed to providing 400,000 acre-feet of water, which is desperately needed. So I want to just start by saying thank you. In 4 years under Joe Biden, the Biden administration would not lift a finger for Texans, for farmers in South Texas, to hold Mexico to account, and the Trump administration has done more in 4 months fighting for water in South Texas than Joe Biden did for 4 years. So I wanted to say thank you, and I wanted to ask how the State Department is approaching next steps on the 1944 Water Treaty?
Well, first of all, we have to understand that that commitment is met, and then we have to begin to prepare for the next cycle. This is a one-year problem. So we want to continue to work on that to make sure that those commitments are made, and that then in the next cycle, this becomes made permanent. That in essence, this becomes a new standard operating procedure and not a one-off. And by the way, it has to be something that exists beyond the presidency of the current president, because if the next president doesn't prioritize it, it could go back. So I just think this continued engagement with them on our expectations. The truth of the matter is, and in fairness, the Mexican government has grown increasingly cooperative on a number of fronts, both on national security issues and common security issues, but also on issues such as this. We're also happy, I think there's also the new treatment plant that they've opened, the Tijuana wastewater one, that we think will also be very helpful to water issues in the region and also the water quality issues. But this was a good news story. I think it's what happens when you make something a priority and then follow through on it. But we have to sustain it, and that really is our focus now, to sustain this through for future cycles, not just the short term.
So, and I'll tell you, earlier this year, I went down to the Rio Grande Valley with Secretary Rollins. And in December, I wrote a provision in the continuing resolution that provided emergency relief to South Texas farmers, $280 million. And Secretary Rollins came down. Now, Brooke is the first Texan ever to be the U.S. Agriculture Secretary, and she's the first Ag Secretary in history to go to the Rio Grande Valley. And Secretary Rollins and I did a roundtable, and I will say, you and I have both been very focused on the Hispanic community in particular. I will say the impact in the Rio Grande Valley of having a president and an administration that is fighting for them is enormously consequential. And so I was very grateful that she came down, and the farmers and ranchers in South Texas see that they've got a president and an administration that's fighting for them. Let me shift to a different topic. Today, South African President Ramaphosa is in Washington, D.C. He'll be meeting with President Trump tomorrow. You and the president, as well as other administration officials, have repeatedly and rightly criticized South African policies on issues ranging from human rights to activities that directly undermine American national security. Those activities, in turn, include what appears to be an explicit and extensive pivot away from the United States and towards the Chinese Communist Party. There are also serious and credible allegations that the South African government's decision-making is compromised by widespread corruption tied directly to Iran. They are working together to target our Israeli allies on the international stage. President Ramaphosa himself has taken an aggressive position, leading a charge of genocide against Israel in the International Court of Justice. And he has pushed for precedents and policies that will not just undermine Israel, but expose American officials to vulnerabilities as well. I have every confidence that President Trump will demand South African officials change their policies and will hold them accountable if they don't. And it's critically important for the American people to understand the bases for our policies. Please talk a little bit about the extent of South Africa's malign activities and how they are undermining American national security interests.
Well, it's one of the, first of all, we chose not to participate in this year's G20 hosted by South Africa, either at the foreign minister level or the president's level. And it had a lot to do with some of these issues, in addition to some of the issues they brought on their agenda, which we don't think reflect the priorities of this administration. So the president of South Africa is here today because he says he endeavors to reset relations between our countries. And President Trump, if someone says that, is always going to be open to resetting relations. But it will have to touch on some of the issues just pointed to now. Obviously, the position they've adopted towards Israel is way, not just off balance, but completely geared towards one side. And it makes one wonder about these allegations that are out there now of foreign influence, including with Iran. They clearly, on the global stage, and multiple multinational organizations have consistently been a vote against America's interests, time and again. Not one off. You always understand when some country has to go in one direction opposite to you, because, you know, that happens. That's what diplomacy is ultimately about. Diplomacy is also about when we're aligned, we work together. When we're unaligned, we have to talk. But when one country is consistently unaligned with the United States on issue after issue after issue after issue, now you have to make conclusions about it. So all I could say about the meeting today, I'm not there, obviously, because I'm here with all of you. In fact, it may be going on right now as we speak, or was scheduled to go on as we speak, is this was an outreach on the part of the South African president. He said he wanted to come to Washington. He wanted to reset relations with the United States. I have no reports as to how that meeting has gone so far. If there's a willingness on their side to reset relations, obviously was something we'll explore, but we do so with eyes wide open to what they've done so far.
And how does their campaign against Israel undermine America?
Well, I think first of all because it echoes some of the charges that are being made by some of the biggest enemies of Israel that happen to be ours. Whether it's Iran, whether it's these radical groups that chant death to America, death to Israel. So we're very concerned about that. I also think there's real concern in our mind about some of these international institutions that, frankly, South Africa has lined up strongly behind, who would seek to, if they could, jail, imprison, indict American office holders because of some of the positions we've taken on public policy, even though we're not members to the conventions that create these entities. So if you talk about these groups they are in essence utilizing their forum on the national stage as a nation state under this president and this leadership to echo the claims and the positions taken by not just Iran, but in many cases China as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. Marco, thank you. I can confidently say I speak for the majority of this committee when I tell you how proud we are of what you're doing and your success as Secretary of State and the other hats you wear, too many of which there are to reiterate here. And I'm sorry that there were intemperate remarks here, as happens from time to time in the committee, but you know how that goes. You've served here. But thank you. There may be some questions for the record, which the members can submit until 5 o'clock tomorrow night. And we hope your responses will be as quickly as possible to any of those. With that, again, thank you so much for appearing here. Thank you for your time. I have finally figured out how to stop the protests from happening here. They haven't happened, except when you've been here. So maybe there's some way we can, maybe there might be some reference between the two. In any event, thank you so much. And with that, the committee is adjourned. American hostages from the clutches of Hamas. You've instituted a return to the Office for States Employees and a return to a merit-based hiring system, ensuring the department can deliver for the American people. And of course, the Trump administration has sought to overhaul our federal spending, cutting much of the waste and abuse. Main concentrations we have of the view is the fact that we're going upside down $1 trillion every 150 or so days. You've done all of these things while maintaining our strong presence abroad. This committee has worked hard in a bipartisan manner to approve 31 nominees for posts here and overseas to make sure you have the staff you need. And we continue to do so because you can't be everywhere at once, and the U.S. must have high-level representation on the world stage. This is important because we face threats from all across the globe. Actors from China to Russia, from North Korea to Iran have united in an authoritarian axis bent on weakening the United States. I believe China is America's greatest long-term competitor. But the previous administration treated China like an ally we disagreed with rather than an aggressor that takes advantage of America and our allies at every level. The Chinese government is fundamentally different from the United States. Where America promotes free markets and innovation, the CCP clamps down on businesses and steals American intellectual property. Where we believe that every person has God-given rights, the Chinese government commits genocide against Uyghurs and other minorities in China and harasses dissidents here in America. We want to work with you to ensure you have the tools you need to counter Chinese influence, including through the Development Finance Corporation and the Millennial Challenge Corporation. To truly counter China, we need to catalyze private sector growth worldwide where we can. As you know, China is not the only threat. Over the last decade, particularly in the last 3 years, Putin's aggression has created the largest security crisis in Europe since the Second World War. President Trump is working diligently to help end this conflict. We need to keep pushing our European allies to increase cooperation on security. Some have already boosted their defense spending to 5%, but many still need to take stronger steps to confront the threats they face from Russia. In the Middle East, even after the president's successful trip, tensions remain high. Hezbollah remains a disruptor to reform in Lebanon. Baghdad must work to disarm Iranian-backed militias. Israel remains under constant threat from Hamas and Iran's